The name Roswell is associated with a multitude of mysterious phenomena: aliens, the image of a crashed UFO, secret government investigations, charred bodies, debris from an interplanetary spacecraft, a weather balloon, and much more. Throughout the history of UFO sightings, no case has received such worldwide attention as the events in Roswell in 1947. The alleged crash of a flying saucer was widely covered in the media of those years and remains one of the most frequently discussed incidents today. So many books and articles have been written about Roswell that it would seem there is nothing left to add. Yet every ufologist inevitably expresses their point of view on this significant event. The Roswell incident is a cornerstone for all UFO researchers. This case includes everything imaginable: the crash of some flying object, numerous testimonies from people who held debris from the craft, government classification of facts, and the largest list of incident witnesses, over 500 people. Strangely enough, interest in the alleged catastrophe initially waned as quickly as it had flared up. Many years later, UFO enthusiasts and researchers revived the issue, and the search for truth, debates, and commentary resumed. Most of us know that in 1947, Roswell newspapers and other publications reported the capture of a flying saucer. A few hours later, the news of the UFO crash was replaced by a story about the landing of a weather balloon. At that time, public trust in the media, especially when citing official sources, was so high that this denial was accepted as fact. The excitement surrounding the incident quickly subsided. But, fortunately, it was revived in 1976 and continues to this day. In January 1976, ufologists William Moore and Stanton R. Friedman were working on an article based on interviews with two witnesses to this incident. Friedman met with a man and a woman who were among the primary eyewitnesses to the events in Corona, New Mexico, in 1947. A retired Air Force officer, Major Jesse A. Marcel, claimed that under orders from his command, he was directly involved in the investigation of the UFO crash. The witness was Lydia Sleppy, who worked at a radio station in Albuquerque. She claimed that the armed forces classified information about the crashed saucer and the bodies of little men on board. Furthermore, according to her, Air Force personnel stopped the news report from being broadcast literally at the last minute. The U.S. Air Force announced to the world that they had captured a flying saucer on a remote ranch in Corona. Approximately 4 hours later, they corrected the story, saying the find was merely a weather balloon with a radar reflector. There are two interpretations of this incident. Which one is true? Skeptics continue to insist on the weather balloon version. But as long as there are witnesses challenging this explanation, the investigation must continue. The Roswell incident is not mentioned in the archives of Project Blue Book. The news of the UFO crash was immediately refuted and therefore quickly forgotten. The only one who used and promoted this information in his lectures was enthusiast Frank Edwards, mid-1950s. Apparently, from the very beginning, supporters of the extraterrestrial version tried to immortalize this great story. The secret becomes known. On June 24, 1947, the term flying saucer was coined by pilot Kenneth Arnold. He used this term to describe a UFO that flew over Mount Rainier. A few weeks later, the phrase was already being used by the Air Force to describe the object found in Corona, New Mexico. All evidence from the site of the alleged UFO crash was collected and delivered to Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. In some incredible way, the debris that Jesse Marcel transported and described as material of extraterrestrial origin transformed into fragments of an ordinary weather balloon upon arrival at the Air Force Base. All eyewitness testimonies were suppressed, and those who continued to insist on the version of an alien spacecraft crash were declared fabricators. Marcel categorically stated that the debris he saw, held in his hands, and showed to his family members was not the same as what was presented to the public in photographs under the title Weather Balloon Debris. What happened to the real physical evidence? There is a rather controversial document dated November 18, 1952, which might lift the veil of secrecy. Possibly authored by Dwight D. Eisenhower, it stated that on September 24, 1947, President Harry S. Truman ordered a top-secret operation, Majestic 12, to study the remains of the UFO crash at Roswell. This typewritten sheet arrived in a plain envelope with an Albuquerque postmark to a Los Angeles television producer, Jamie Shandera, in December 1984. In early 1987, another copy of this letter was given to Timothy Good, a British ufologist. Good published it in the local press in May. These documents caused a real stir, but their authenticity, unfortunately, has not been established. No expert examination of these documents was conducted, and many ufologists are inclined to believe that these papers are forgeries. The authenticity of one piece of evidence is not so important because there is a huge amount of other testimony. The Roswell Saga. Part 1. The Testimony of Mac Brazel. Everything effectively began in Silver City, New Mexico, on June 25th. A dentist reported observing a saucer-shaped UFO about half the size of the moon. 2 days later, in New Mexico, W.C. Dobbs reported a white, glowing object flying over his head near the White Sands Missile Range. On the same day, Captain E.B. Disvergers, likely a misspelling of Dices or a similar name, reported to his commander that he had seen a white, blazing UFO flying over missile installations. 2 days later, on June 29th, military engineer C.J. Zahn and 3 of his subordinates were at White Sands and observed a giant silver disk moving north across the wasteland. On July 2nd, a UFO was sighted in 3 locations: White Sands, Roswell, and Alamogordo. In Roswell, on the same day, the Wilmot couple saw a flying object. They described it as 2 inverted saucers stacked on top of each other. The UFO flew over their house at high speed. 1947, UFO crash in the USA, Roswell, New Mexico. Mac Brazel, the owner of the ranch where the amazing Roswell events began, either on July 2nd or July 4th. The exact date is unknown. Mac could not have imagined that day that his name would be forever inscribed in the history of ufology. An ordinary working man, he lived on his ranch, Foster Place, in Lincoln County, near Corona, New Mexico. Brazel was a family man, but his wife and children lived in Tularosa, near Alamogordo. The reason for the family living separately was that the schools in Tularosa were better than in Corona. Brazel stayed in the old house on the ranch, where he cared for sheep and handled daily farm chores. He lived simply and was content with his work, family, and life in general. For a short period, Mac found himself at the epicenter of public attention and subsequently deeply regretted reporting his find. The night before, a severe thunderstorm had raged. Everything around was illuminated by flashes of lightning, and thunderclaps rumbled. Summer thunderstorms are a common phenomenon in those parts, but that evening the farmer noticed something special, a sound like an explosion mixed with the thunder. Mac was in the house with his children and initially paid no particular attention to the strange sounds. The next day, as soon as it dawned, Brazel went to look for sheep that had gotten out of the enclosure during the storm and were lost. A neighbor's 7-year-old boy, William D. Proctor, tagged along. Soon they came upon a clearing a quarter of a mile long and several hundred feet wide, which was strewn with debris of various shapes. Each fragment was made of a material the farmer had never seen before. He soon found the sheep and returned home. Mac brought some of the strange debris with him and put it in the shed. Brazel had no idea of the significance of his find. His daughter, Bessie Brazel, recalled, "The pieces were like waxed paper, only made of aluminum foil. Some debris had inscriptions resembling numbers, but there wasn't a single word we could read. On some parts of this foil, there were, as if, woven ribbons, and when we held them up to the light, they looked like flowers or patterns. It was impossible to erase or wash them off this material. The inscriptions looked like numbers, at least it seemed to me they were numbers. They were written in a column, as if it were the solution to a complex problem, but they didn't look like the numbers we use. Apparently, it seemed to me they were numbers because they were written in a column. No, it definitely wasn't a weather balloon. We've seen many meteorological devices, both on the ground and in the sky. We even found several of Japanese make. This was a completely different material, which we had never encountered before or since." In the afternoon, Mac took young D. Proctor home. The neighbor lived 10 miles from the ranch. He took one of the pieces of debris with him and showed it to the boy's parents, Floyd and Loretta. The farmer wanted to convince the Proctors to return with him and look at the strange find in the clearing. Floyd Proctor later recounted their conversation. Mac, said it wasn't paid